Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next Wasteless World Talks with Kevin, Mark, and myself today. We will write on a back of a language towards wasteless world, and we will do it with one term, and the term today is fall, F-A-L-L. And Kevin, I have you on the top of my screen, so you will be the first one who I will ask. When you hear the term fall, what came first to your mind, please?
First thing that came to my mind was that it's good Bill's not with us. Because we'll be talking about what we consider autumn and the Americans call fall. Because for us, fall is something you do on your ass.
What about you, Mark? What came to your mind?
That absolutely exactly the same. Falling is collapse, falling down. And I'm intrigued as to why Americans call autumn fall. Is it because the leaves fall? I've no idea.
I have no idea, but we have 1 month, the month November. In Czech is called listopad, and these are two words together. List is the sheet or the leaf on the tree, and pad it means falling. But it's just 1 month, it's called listopad. So like the month of falling leaves.
Okay. One of the beauties of fall, as in autumn, are the colours. Absolutely adore the colours. And particularly as the sun's going down, if it's a clear sky, where you've got the leaves just as they're about to fall. Wonderful colours.
You know, I was expecting that the people in the noon discussion and you will speak about the fall as autumn and fall as falling down. But what surprised me, and I think it was introduced by Charito on the noon discussion, was falling in love. So fall is in general something negative. Why falling in love is the very opposite.
Or yet, on the other hand, if the word fall is for collapse, perhaps falling in love is the complete collapse of reason.
That makes a lot of sense.
It is the beauty of the emotion. It is the unpredictability. It's the things that weren't expected. Reason goes out of the window.
Yeah, and love is blind.
Are we being too cynical so close to Valentine's Day? I don't know. But it is, yes, falling in love. It's true. What is breaking down? Is it the barriers collapse and one becomes more open? Or one simply is knocked over, one is smitten by something? I don't know.
Yeah, or it could be that it's an out of control moment which normally ends in a crash.
You know, when I was writing one of my Czech this time travel postcards today, I came to the term chaos, and I check in Wikipedia what chaos mean, and I was quite surprised because the original meaning in Greek or Latin, Greek probably, was that it's the time before everything began. But the second explanation in Czech, it's everything is unsystematic and whatever. So only negatives. But how do we know that before has been only negatives? How do we know that before falling in love was something what needs to be corrected? Or I don't want to say corrected, but you understand what I mean probably.
Yes, but then you can apply fall as a double negative. So if you see a fall in unemployment, a fall in early deaths, then this is extremely positive. So if you're looking at fall applied to something negative, it's a double negative, hence positive.
You dive into math. I was never good in math, but I do understand.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there is a lot of discussion about the fall of the systems.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting because I was thinking about this book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And it wasn't the rise and decline, because it didn't decline, it collapsed. And so a fall is a collapse, is a catastrophe, not any ease decline. It is a sudden collapse. And I guess that would be the same with every system. At some point, it is probably going to fall rather than decline.
Do you think that I know I think last week I asked the question, can a system change, or should we try to use a change system? So system which will be created by permanent change, like nature does. Every moment is something different. It's changing. None of us is the same. Tomorrow we will be different than we are today. But our society created the systems which try to have everything the same, mass production, every product, whatever. So we are concentrating on the mass of making same things and same mistakes again and again, just the time are different. So isn't it time really for the fall, really hard probably? But does the fall of systems need to have a negative consequences?
Not necessarily. Sorry, Mark, go on.
No, I was going to say that there are benefits to structure that people, I mean, if one said, here in the UK, we very sensibly drive on the left-hand side. If we said, no, we don't need this, everyone can drive whichever way they want, it would not work well. So in many respects, we do need some principles to enable a system to flow and for people to live together. The question is, there is a requirement for certain rules, certain principles that enable harmony. But if one is simply looking at everyone being an exact copy of someone else, then that has gone way beyond harmony, and that's turned into something authoritarian, fascist, and not what we want at all. Sorry, Kevin.
I agree with you. I was just going to say that the problem with the system is as soon as it's done, as soon as it's established, it's dating. And so systems lack flexibility to adapt to changes in society, changes in attitudes, changes to whatever. They don't change with the times. And so they constantly need to be updated or replaced.
I
Yes.
was listening yesterday to an interview of an Italian economist with a British Channel 4. They have some whatever changers, game changers. I don't know how it's called, the podcast. And it was quite interesting. The lady, the Italian economist, was born in 1988. That's important information. I can tell you, in this 20 minutes interview, I have heard the term Karl Marx more than in 10 years in my socialist republic education time. What was interesting, she was really well prepared. She wrote a book about changing of systems and something like that. She never mentioned the term communism or socialism, not a single time. but she was very deep speaking about Marx ideas, and it was somehow confusing for me, because a lady who was born after the general fall of communism in many countries, including my own, never lived in socialism, but somehow think that socialism ideas are better than the capitalism ideas. I don't think so. I lived there for 18 years. I have not a bad life. I was a kid. The only thing which we cannot do was travel abroad. And there was no internet, so we don't know what is abroad. There was evil. Fine. So I do not want to face evil. But I never felt shortage or something like that. But at the same time, I understand the negatives of the permanently being controlled and so on. But today, in many destinations, we are almost in the same situation. We just call it different. And I have the fear that many of the system, they just change the name, but the core remain exactly the same.
I think we've got to be very careful with dogma and principles and systems. I mean, the labels apply to them, as you say. The principles of Marx differ significantly to what communism as practiced in the Soviet Union and China became. Similarly, the principles of capitalism, as enunciated by Adam Smith in the book The Wealth of Nations, is quite different to capitalism as we see it today. People have taken ideas and concepts and pushed them way out there such that they've become self-serving. And it happens. I mean, if one ignores just capitalism and communism for a moment, is interesting to see evangelicals and in Christianity. One can hear fundamentalists, as some of them call themselves, who will point out that it is perfectly correct, an eye for an eye, that one should be incriminating people. They take the Ten Commandments, and what's interesting is that if you actually look at the Sermon on the Mount and the concept of loving thy neighbor and welcoming anyone, whatever creed, whatever their beliefs are, whatever color of their skin, that flies in the face of some of the evangelical movements that we see in the States at the moment. People will tend to take a principle and drive it, often motivated by greed and appetite for power. And I think it's difficult for us to use some of those labels in comparing things now when they've gone through this process for many, many decades, if not centuries. I'll stop there, I promise. This is where I'll fall over.
When I lived in Germany, one of the nearby towns was Wuppertal. And Wuppertal was famous for two things. One of them was Friedrich Engels, who was Marx, I think the co-author on Das Kapital.
Yes.
And I think it was so ironic because the other thing that Wuppertal was famous for was aspirin. So this town caused one of the greatest headaches of the 20th century and also the cure.
It happened like so, it's I was thinking about the fall really, because Use, who live in Tanzania, the first what came to his mind was what you mentioned, Mark, falling rates or falling prices, which are not there, but the falling social securities they are facing, and so on. So he see the mostly the negatives, and then came the fall in love and the discussion completely. There was a transition, and I know that we can fall in love with a person. We can do even with an animal. But let's say when we are speaking about a person, about humans, uh, what do you think is the key to fall in love in work? I mean, with work. What is the key component that we start to love our work? Is it money? I don't think so.
I think it's if you do something and it doesn't feel like work, then you're falling in love with what you're doing.
Hmm.
Because what you're doing and work can be two completely different things.
Is it somehow connected with the meaningfulness? From the perspective of the person who is doing the work, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if work doesn't have meaning, it's then you're just doing it for the money.
Mark.
yeah, it's and certainly it does, and I think that anyone that is working purely for financial gain is left with a very large hole in their soul. It's I found it interesting years ago talking with some people about the concept of retirement and when should someone retire? And in most, certainly European countries, Northern Hemisphere, I guess, there is an assumption that there is a point, an age at which one stops. It's an age at which one receives a state pension. It's an age where some companies say you must stop working at this age. Okay? And whatever it is, there's a point. And for some people, they clamor to get there and they pass that birthday and they have a little drinks celebration and they're given a clock. They used to be given a clock, which was, of course, the last thing they needed because now they had so much time on their hands, they didn't need something to measure it. Okay. And the idea was now you're relieved and you can do whatever you like. And of course, what's so tragic is the number of people who basically died a very short while afterwards because they didn't have the routine, as we discussed with systems, and they didn't have that purpose. Why do I get up in the morning? And various other reasons. And going back to this question, what is retirement? And it was a definition I heard many years ago, and it was retirement is when you stop working for people that you haven't got time for, doing things that you're not bothered about. And whatever you do after that, you've retired. I realized that I effectively retired at the age of 40. Yeah, I work every day since, and I'm not 41. I think I am, but I'm not nowhere near it. The point is that I stopped working for people I had no time for, doing things I had no time for. And that motivation is every one of us has a different motivation as to the purpose, surely. And I think one that is common for a lot of people is the sense of making a difference in some way or another. And once again, at this point, I will stop talking.
Actually, Mark, you just remind me, this morning one of my good friends, he sent a photo. His new book has just come out, and it came out. He's Danish, but it's been published in Sweden in Swedish. And he is so pleased, this feeling that he used his time in a different way to create something which wouldn't exist if he hadn't made it himself, which in a way was what you
Yes.
were talking about. It's fantastic. It's really an achievement because quite often work isn't an achievement.
No. No. Um, absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely right. And it was interesting. I was listening to a podcast this morning of an interview with Rutger Bregman, who wrote Humankind. And if anyone listening to this or watching this has not read Humankind, I urge you to read it by Rutger Bregman. And he was looking, his latest book is Moral Ambition, and how we can make a difference and how people have made a difference by being able to cause, you know, the end of slavery, for example. One sees movements in which people have caused a fall in negative structures. Many people regarded slavery as perfectly fine because it enabled growth in capitalism. It gave profit, which was surely what capitalism was all about. And we realized that there was actually a moral compass that people had lost. And I think the sense of making a difference, and in some instances, there will undoubtedly be ego for all of us, of leaving some form of legacy that will help someone somewhere. And it could be the creation of a form of art, it could be helping to change attitudes. You know, how wonderful to be able to do that rather than saying, and this man went to his grave and his bank account had this amount in it. Hmm?
Actually, I think one sign of a successful life or not is if you had to have your job put on your gravestone. Because imagine being buried and it says under your name TV license inspector. That
No,
that would put a stop to a lot of poor career choices, maybe.
no, that's a really good point. I found that I found it funny that when I left my last big corporate gig at Nokia, I was used to having the different titles that went with different corporate roles, or my own company role and things. And I just made a choice on a title for myself that summed up not only what I thought I was, but what I desperately wanted to be. And that was just putting independent. And it's wonderful. Every time I look at it, I just think there is a need to actually not simply follow the herd. Is this a conscious decision you're making in going down this direction or another? And it is fascinating how we label ourselves. And mind you, if someone put independent on my gravestone, they'd probably think I was a politician with a small party. I'm not going to have a gravestone, by the way. I'm having my ashes. I've asked for my ashes to be dispersed on Lake Geneva. Yes. And the idea is that after I've gone, I'm going to try and find my way down to the Mediterranean from the lake.
See, when I was working at this very prestigious German design company, and they decided it'd be really cool for everybody on their business card to have a quote. And I thought this was really pretentious rubbish, really. And they kept saying, "We're not accepting your quote." And in the end, I got a business card with no quote. But I mean, what is wrong with "Don't step on my blue suede shoes"?
Speaking about the business cards, I have many titles as well. Up to the president, it was on my card. But when I left, I have it for 13 years, human there. And it is very interesting how the people interact. And everybody who received the business card interact exactly the same. You hand it over the business card. I do it the Japanese way, so with both hands. They look at it, they look in my eyes, look at it, and start speaking. Not about the business card, not about me. They just simply start speaking. Like us. That's very interesting. Very interesting. But to be honest, when I stay for the first time on stage, 300 people or so, and I have on the presentation, I'm Mike Rada, I'm human. It was a very strange feeling to say that. But the fact is, everybody in the room becomes silent immediately. And I continue. And it's so interesting that you don't see anyone having similar, but we all are humans.
Well, at the moment.
At the moment, exactly.
Yeah. It's also interesting country to country. In Denmark, mostly the business card says your function, whereas in Germany it says your rank. And you can really judge a lot from society about the way you are described in your job.
Yes.
And in
The one of
Japan, it's generally
yes,
seniority.
yeah, yes. The two best business cards I've ever been handed were one that said head of global finance. And I thought, wow, I have now met the person that is the head of finance globally. And the 24-year-old lady that handed me the card was charming, but I realized I'd misinterpreted it. The other one was far better, which was John Perry Barlow. John Perry Barlow co-founded the EFF. He was lyricist with the Grateful Dead. He did so many great things. He's a real character. And his business card just said, cognitive dissident.
That's very nice.
It was, no, it was great. But going back, Michael, the going back to that fall, what would you like to fall?
Good question. I would like to the current politics system fall.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking something very close to that as well, the European Commission. And I'd be love to be the one that pokes it and watch it come down.
And I think Kevin and Mark, I think we will be still alive when this happens, because I don't think it will survive. At the same time, I don't think that United Nations will die later than us. For 80 years, it does not work properly, and I don't see any reason for another 10 years to run. There will be established a new organization, new name, and so on, of course, as usually. But I don't think it will survive. And what about you? What do you want to fall, Mark?
I am so despondent over the current political environment, the geopolitical environment. It's appalling on so many levels, and one can point the finger at corruption and various other things. I would really like to see a fall of what has become the second Gilded Age, where we have such an extraordinary gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I'm looking at the extremes of the haves and the have-nots. The way in which the bodies put in place to regulate, to control, have been completely neutered by political and financial power. And I would like to see that fall. And possibly it is being brought home by the horror that we're seeing coming out of the Epstein files. Because quite apart from the tragedy of those that survived, that were being shipped around, which is just an horrendous thing, is seeing those communications between what are being called the Epstein class and that astonishing sense of entitlement that is out there. And that is what I want to see fall, because I think and I hope that a lot of good would come out of its collapse.
We are all, we would like to follow almost the same thing, or it's directed in the same direction. What do you think we should do? Because we must be the active part.
Actually, we do, but we're forced into it. I think that I was just thinking from what Mark was saying that this expression, too big to fail, it only applies to financial institutions. They can't fail, they can't fall because we all have to bail them out, which I think, who says they can't fail? Who says that they have to be rescued? Let the buggers fall like the rest of us, It's just a huge con. It's those with money demanding more money. And so the first thing we need to do is get control over who spends the money. And we shouldn't give money to bankers.
No, I think the focus is on action, what can be done. And when I look at the protesters in Minneapolis, I am full of admiration at the fact that they have been able to restrain themselves from violent protest, how they have been able to organize themselves, how they have been able to pull a community of people spread across the political spectrum, financial spectrum. But here are people standing together, taking action, and it is humbling to watch what they're doing. And to think that we look at we think of Les Miserables, and we think of great protests that have been turned into artistic works and people manning the barricades. But when you've got individuals wandering around the streets, playing accordions, dressed as giant frogs, you realize that there are many ways of causing the collapse of systems that don't require, one aggressive form of, a conflict. And it's how do we keep our minds focused on what can be done and ensuring other people are understanding it. So I mentioned Rutger Bregman earlier, and Rutger was in this podcast said that he was fascinated in looking at academic research into during the war, the Dutch resistance and the fact that the resistance that was romanticized didn't exist. And enough studies have been done since to show that it didn't. And then those researchers around the world, various academics, looked into what does it cause people to become active in rebelling against something. And they tried to look at it by their characteristics, gender, intelligence, what attributes they had. And they could not find any link between the people that would take up causes that in many cases did cause something to be overthrown. They just couldn't find a linking factor until they looked at the data from a different perspective. And what they discovered was that if people were asked, then they would. People would often not do it of their own volition, but they would respond if asked. And it's very easy for people, and I'm very conscious of the risk for this myself, that can go out saying we should be doing this, we should be doing that, proselytizing, here, there, and everywhere. And actually, the simple act of listening to people and asking people, and so many people are willing to be part of movements that will cause systems to fall.
One really positive thing is
we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, is that these giants, they are much more unstable and vulnerable to action, and we can topple them if we want to.
Yes.
The only issue which I see with protesting and so on was clearly shown with this Fridays for Fortune and similar. They met every Friday, they strike every Friday, and they did it after a few months. Nobody even noticed that these people are striking. So it's important to say when it's enough, when it's not misused by someone just to win more time. But I think that will be a discussion because we just reached the last minute, and I would like to thank you for the very, very interesting discussion, and wish you, of course, have a nice time free of waste and wasting in all its forms. Stay safe, be free, be human, and let's fall only in love.
Yeah.
Not in
That's
the
a good
traps
idea.
of the giants. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Will do. Bye.